Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Artificial Empathy vlog. Today, I'm with the Professor David Bracken to address some topics about artificial emotional intelligence and artificial empathy. You can quickly jump to your most inspiring question clicking on the following related items in the video description area. Artificial emotional intelligence and psychologists. Are we able to develop a working artificial emotional intelligence? What should be the role of psychologists in developing an ethical artificial emotional intelligence? What will be the artificial emotional intelligence impact on the job automation? Where do you think artificial emotional intelligence won't be applicable? What should be the danger of an AI partnership in coaching? How far are we to understand or predict human behavior? You can interact moreover with our guest using our social networks, clicking both on the link in the channel description area or in the video description. And if you have any questions for them, feel free to submit them and comment here. Thank you, David, for accepting my invitation to discuss artificial emotional intelligence topic and about connections between artificial emotional intelligence and industrial organizational psychology environment. Another topic I would like to introduce with you is how this technology can impact on, for example, coaching. We have a pretty long list of questions. So if you agree, let me start with them. Okay?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. How do you think the artificial emotional intelligence will affect your profession?
So one thing that comes to mind, for example, is that with the efficiencies that artificial AI might be able to present to us in both detecting and delivering interactions, like we've seen it now at play recently in terms of people being interviewed, having screening interviews on their phone, and that the technology detects not only, of course, what they are saying, but also their nonverbal communications and coding those as well, to the extent that we find that not only speeds up the process, but it also helps us make more accurate decisions about people. That alone, is exciting. So that's on the side of detecting emotional intelligence or detecting capabilities in people through the mechanics of it. What I don't see in that process is their side of the equation. And that's the part of the interviewer. And then, so if the applicant or the employee does not have the benefit of being able to receive nonverbal communications or receive a sense of emotional connection with that person, the question becomes, are we really getting a true picture of that person's capability? But if we can use artificial emotional intelligence to put employees and applicants at ease, for example, and make them feel like they're in something that's approaching a more human connection, perhaps they will feel more comfortable. Perhaps they will feel more engaged, in the process. So I do worry about, at the current state of technology, when we're only worried about the detecting the emotional intelligence of the person that we're evaluating, that they are not having the benefit of interacting with a human being. And I really question whether that, really gives us the true picture of whether the person is going to be successful on the job or not. I think we're really in the very beginning stages of what it can do, and it's very exciting to think what the possibilities may be. But the data is not coming out to us yet that I have seen that demonstrates that we are really at a point now where we can make better decisions about people. Maybe we can just make them faster. So that's about it.
Whoops, thank you. And do you think today we are able to develop a work in artificial emotional intelligence, or we will have to wait, for example, 10 years to have something that could really work and give very accurate results?
I think the answer to that question depends upon what is emotional intelligence and what is artificial, emotional intelligence. I think some people are out there. Well, I know some people are out there already saying that they can deliver some version of artificial emotional intelligence. But then you have to question, what is it that they are using as a definition of that? I think we have all seen, or at least over here, we've been seeing that some information about the technology now where a machine can call up, let's say, a hair salon and say, I'd like to make an appointment for Mr. Smith. And then the person says, oh, I'd be glad to set up an appointment for you. And then the machine says, oh, I'm so glad you can help me. And the person at the other end doesn't even know that it is a machine. And I think about some of us have experienced that to our great frustration. But the question, when we're just getting calls from people soliciting us for some supposedly people, it's really a machine. And it's pretty amazing how long you can go on and carry that conversation. So if you define that as artificial intelligence, artificial emotional intelligence, because the machine says something in response to what you say, then that seems a very crude definition of it. For example, one of the keys seems to be in most definitions of emotional intelligence is around empathy. And so the question then becomes, is that artificial intelligence for the machine to say, or person to say, I can feel your pain, or I really hear what you're saying, or and it's very simple to do. And in fact, we find some human beings that do that very well. And they say things like, well, let me repeat what I thought I heard you say, trying to come across as empathetic, when really all they're really trying to do is promote their own position and they're really not demonstrating empathy. So if we start with some very elusive constructs like empathy, and saying, how does a machine show emotional intelligence by expressing empathy? What exactly does that mean? And will we ever be able to deliver it? My sense, and I think we're going to talk about this a little more later, is that we can only go so far in that, and we don't probably even want to replace the role of human beings in this interaction at certain points of the discussion that become very important. One of the things that I'm also very interested in is the role of trust. And when let's say, for example, a feedback discussion is going on, and trust goes in both directions. And I'm very skeptical at this point in time whether artificial emotional intelligence can ever establish, a level of trust that needs to exist for the discussion. Yeah. Thanks. All right.
Okay, let's move to the next one. We know that the nature of artificial intelligence, and more in details, some technologies like deep learning are similar to a black box, where these systems are able to take their own decision, but we can't observe all the steps. What, on your mind, should be the role of psychologists in developing artificial emotional intelligence, or more in detail, an ethical and trustful artificial emotional intelligence?
Yeah, like most processes like this that are emerging in a very interesting and sometimes exciting and sometimes scary way, I can think of kind of basically three roles, and there's nothing special about this. I mean, I think one are the innovators, the people who can think of all these great things that perhaps artificial emotional intelligence and these processes can be used in in the way that we can apply them as industrial organizational psychologists in making decisions about people and creating behavior change. We don't know at this point in time all the capabilities and whether we want to put all those capabilities into play, but it's fun to imagine what those could be. So, and as so the innovators then turn those over to the creators, right? And the people who actually have to turn these ideas into products and services, but they have to be ones that are consistent with best practices. Having been in this business as long as I have been since and starting, practicing in the 70s, it's been fun to see, for example, the evolution of just the general business of assessments over time. And now we have all of that we can build upon and learn about things that work so well and some things that work not so well. But artificial intelligence is creating a whole new sandbox to play in, what those things can be. So, which castles are we going to build in the sandbox, and which are going to work better than others. But I think the scariest thing of all for me occurred when I was listening to a podcast, and it was being in an interview of a creator of technology that allows the substitution of a person's voice onto their image. In fact, I saw this on TV just last week, finally, with Barack Obama using somebody else's voice, whose voice sounded like Obama's, putting words into his mouth. And I said on Twitter one day, someday this technology is going to start a war. So during this podcast, they asked the inventor the question saying about its improper use. Are you worried about situations just like that, where they can put the words in somebody else's mouth and it could spread like wildfire and create great disruption or worse in the world? And her answer was, that's not my problem. That's somebody else's problem to solve. And even the interviewers were taken aback, by that. And I'm saying, really? Is that how you look at it? So I would like to think that these people who are the creators and then the overseers of the products that we would use in our profession are, sufficiently ethical and have the foresight and experience to stop, where they think that we're going into areas that are not appropriate to use. But I think that we also have to say that there are and have been in the past some kind of charlatans who will pick up on this technology and run with it, with indeed the thought that this is someone else's problem to solve. We'll have to go out there and make a killing in the market by using a technology like this, where we're think of a lot of ways of doing it. Putting words in interviewers' mouths on a technology a lot, and then putting those same words into different languages using the same image of the interviewer, for example. That's an interesting application. It would have some efficiencies to it, but then the question is who controls what words are coming out of those mouths and the such. So we have a lot to do, and I will just close this question out by saying that I hope I have communicated that I am very enthusiastic and excited about the potential that this is providing, but I think it does secondly have its limits. I don't want to be seen as an naysayer about all of this, but somebody does have to be the conscience of our science.
Thank you. So let's switch to another topic. Let's more naive today. So there are many talks about AI ability to replace the human job. In the beginning, we supposed AI to substitute repetitive job as automation, Cartwright did with the mechanical frame in the textile industry in the late 18th century. Well, we discovered pretty quickly that AI can elaborate data, make calculation in a small fraction of seconds. And lately, in this month, AI shows the ability to examine the human behavior and to predict it, as it happened, for example, with the AI poker player or with the MIT social behavior predictor. But do you think somehow artificial emotional intelligence or empathy, as you discussed before, will increase it? Or on the contrary, the ability to show and feel empathy will be for a long time a prerogative of a human being?
I believe there is a growing consensus as this topic is being bantered about that I was alluding to earlier a little bit, that this technology can only take us so far, and that there is and always will be a place for the human interactions, in this. We when we make decisions about people, sometimes we do it just through administering a test, and there are time and a place for accelerating the process of finding who we think can be successful and who we do not, just by basic capabilities that we can measure in better ways than like interviews and human interactions. But in the end, as we've experienced over time, the hiring process and the feedback process seems to always end, correctly so, with an interaction with a human being. And we need to ask, so why is that? Why is that we don't hire somebody without finally getting a face-to-face interaction with them? So when we think about that part of our job in terms of getting the right people into the organization, we do include that kind of human interaction in the interview process. And it's very difficult, as hard as we try sometimes, to standardize that process through asking the same questions, for example, of people, but nonetheless, there are undoubtedly cues that we get from each other and whether the person thinks this is the place that they want to work, but also what we learn about a person. And sometimes you can't say exactly what that is. One of my fears also about artificial, let's say we're using artificial detection of emotional intelligence, is that we turn, what makes artificial intelligence what it is that it can learn and adapt. And so we turn the machine loose to saying, okay, help us detect some things about applicants and then predict whether they're going to be successful or not. And it gets to a point where they're very good at it, but the machine cannot tell us how they got to that point. And so we cannot share the algorithms. And then some of the reading you and I have been doing lately gets to the point saying, well, Alexa, Hal, whoever is making these decisions for us, tell us, we need to know how you're making this decision about people. AI can get so sophisticated that it knows that if they tell us how they're doing it, that we will turn the machine off. So they make up some other reason for doing it, saying, well, we detected that this person is not open to others people's opinions, or something that sounds rational. And we can say, oh, well, that makes sense, when that's not really the reason that they're doing it, because we've told them to make the best decisions regardless of what the actual answer is. So it's, I'm afraid of it getting away from us, and then getting to algorithms that we can turn into concepts that we understand as human beings. I heard the other day about how, I think it was the Japanese, have multiple words for what an expanse of land means and whether it has obstructions in it or not. Okay, and we don't have that same kind of concept in our vocabulary. And so, and sometimes we make up notions like intuition and gut feeling that we can't explain either. So I would like to just say that we need to have human beings into this for the benefit of both sides of the equation. And I'm also a coach and a manager at points in time, and knowing that interaction just plain needs to happen in a way that machines can't accomplish.
Yeah, I understand. You cover a lot of, let's say, environment where this kind of technology can be and how they can be used. But where do you think artificial emotional intelligence will not be applicable at all? In which kind of environment, job, or other examples?
I alluded to there about coach and manager. And part of the role of a manager, I think, should be as a coach. And there's another word, by the way, that can mean many different things to different people. And it can, depending on what kind of activities need to be done by a manager, take on different levels of difficulty and sophistication. And that's why a lot of people don't do it very well. And we have so many managers and supervisors, it's very hard to train them how to be good in those things. Versus a coach who, unfortunately, you've heard me say that too many people can wake up in the morning and say, I'm a coach now, and hang out a shingle and saying, I'm going to go to work as a coach, versus those who are highly professional and sometimes, ideally, I think, in my opinion, certified. So I think that there are things that are necessary in a coaching relationship that we just can't substitute, with a machine. One of the favorite catchphrases for coaches, and then other people as well, is that when you are interacting with another person, that you be in the moment. And I think in the moment, to me, and I think in general people would say, would be just totally attuned to the person that you're trying to help, trying to understand, and trying to help come to their best solution for how to overcome and achieve obstacles and achieve the goals that they've set out for themselves. I think being in the moment includes so many intangibles in terms of what it is that you are hearing and interpreting, and then relating to past discussions about the goals that the persons want to have in their history, why they haven't achieved the things they want to achieve. And probably, that cannot be described sometimes, and certainly it's hard for people to really replicate that. So there are things that go on that we can't describe, and how we get to it. And there's a certain art to giving feedback, to coaching, to helping people come up with their own solutions that I just don't see that can be replicated. Like I say, who knows, what the technology can come up with, but as I said before, there's a two-way trust that has to happen in order for people to share information and to have a commitment to success on both sides of that equation. So I think, I said at the end of a book I just wrote, I think if the day comes when machines are doing that, I don't want to be part of that book. It's being written about that, and hopefully maybe I'll be going on to my next life, either on Earth or somewhere else.
Okay, you just introduced the coaching. So let me try to go deeper in the coaching topic. So there's a lot of article today about a partnership between AI and coaching. So putting together AI and coaching, for example, helping the coach recording session and recording emotion, perspiration, and other signal of emotion, or say behavioral analysis. But which could be the danger of this machine-human partnership, or it could be a benefit for both?
One of the potential benefits I think, is just the vast, obviously, vast amount of information that artificial intelligence brings to helping us create solutions that, no single person has access to and cannot process. And so if part of the solution of helping somebody is to expand, for example, the realm of ways that they can approach a problem, and that's one of the main values of a coach, is that is to expand their options. People even say, well, here's the problem and the thing that we have to overcome. What are the possible options that might get you there? And just to keep asking the person, well, what else could you do? What else could you do? And a lot of times people said, gee, I haven't, really considered doing that. That's an interesting outcome. If machines can expand that option, that seems to be a potential benefit. The downside to that is that obviously we can only consider so many options, and really need to narrow that down for the person to be able to prioritize and use and make a commitment to doing something. And I'm afraid that some of those options aren't explored. I remember as a coach one time, I was working with somebody on the results of their feedback, and their lowest, by far the lowest score, was about just basically the question, is a good listener. It was basically the skill, and got a really low score. And people in that same company were saying the prior year, and they worked with a different consultant and coach, they walked in a room and had a library of books. So the solution typically was saying, if you're a bad listener, you hand them a book about, the skill of listening, right? Or you send them off to a course on, well, I happen to know the Center for Creative Leadership course, that one of the things that makes you a better listener. So why don't you go off to that? And, so if a machine like a GPS can point you in certain ways and saying, here, these things might help you to get to your end, it kind of overcomes the intuition. And my sense of this person is that we really didn't know, because listening is a very complex kind of skill. So my solution was say, why don't you go back and talk to the people who gave you your feedback and have them share with you, and coach him how to have that discussion about saying, please tell me, why you scored me so low on listening. I really would like to know, and I don't care who said it. And they said, Bob, you need to put your BlackBerry down. In all your meetings, you just sit there doing your BlackBerry, whether it's a one-on-one or it's a team meeting, you're always doing something else. So his action plan was to put his BlackBerry away. And the next time his score skyrocketed. That was the fix. So that's a kind of the thing that a coach has a sense perhaps to do. I'm not saying I'm a better coach than anybody else, but I think that was a pretty obvious solution to all that. But like scores, or even listening for a certain word or something, may not that a machine can process, doesn't necessarily point you in the right direction. We know ways as coaches and as people's managers, as we get to know people, that there are other approaches to helping them, achieve their goals, than just pointing them to books and taking courses. And the knee-jerk reaction is to go send the person to training. And sometimes, more often than not, there are other things happening in the environment than just ability that we need to help people with. So the potential is there, like I say, to have a lot of resources available to us, a lot of information, a lot of options. But in the end, I think the decision making has to happen between a person and a person.
Yeah, so let's say that the benefit could be a kind of augmented technology or augmented intelligence, or putting together human and machine, as you say, so we can give them more data in real time, and then you can process this data as a recording data and see details, but probably you miss it. But on the other side, it's very hard to think we can, in the future, eliminate or substitute coaching, for example, with artificial emotional intelligence. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, I think that then gets to this other point about some of the fears that I have around this, and that it could. I can have this vision of a coach coming and sitting down with literally a black box, with them or something, that listens to the conversation or something, and has a screen and says, "Oh, you said that you are not supported around here. That must mean that you have a bad manager, or you are paranoid, or something that says that the machine says that the diagnostic of saying that is such and such, and the coach kind of takes that information and goes off with it and says, but we have a technology, we being their firm, their coaching firm, or my coaching firm, has this technology that helps us to better understand more quickly and more efficiently what the best solution for you and we can do now our coaching meetings in half an hour instead of 3 hours, and get to the same point, and think how much money that's going to save this organization, and blah, blah, blah." So there are going to be people like that. Okay. And they are the people who are not certified as coaches, but have some technology that they sell and believe perhaps that it helps them, provides them with the resources that they need, instead of going out and spending the time to learn what being a coach really means. So, and people get attracted to technology, and will undoubtedly, I think some people will buy into that scenario and will do that. And that's one of my biggest fears, I think, is in some form or fashion that that mentality can also be applied, let's say, to the coach, the manager subordinate relationship, and saying, let's provide since we have 1,000 managers in this organization who are leaders and have subordinates, let's arm them with something on their phone that records the conversation and tells them how to respond to the person. And as I'm saying, maybe some of those answers are good, but some of those answers probably will be misguided. And it's like the GPS taking us down the dead end street, because we ignored the signs that said, road closed. We said, well, the GPS said to go there, so I'm going to go, and how many, we've all done that, so sometimes you can have too much faith, in technology and taking you to a point if you ignore kind of your responsibilities. And don't just, abdicate responsibility to a black box.
Yes, absolutely. So as let's say the last question, I would like to go a step further in trusting machines. So there's a lot of, let's say, software companies that today are trying to use machine learning or deep learning to predict human behavior. So we can talk about, for example, the ability not only to observe and understand, but even to predict a human behavior in a given situation. From your point of view, how far we are, and how biases we can be in doing this kind of analysis?
There are so many parameters around that question, but that, let me start by saying that, we are, in psychology, in the business of trying to predict human behavior. So to the extent that we can find ways of adding to our knowledge about a given person as to, how they're going to behave in the future, whether it's at the point of hiring or at the point we have to make other decisions like promotions, for example, how people are going to behave in jobs they haven't had a chance to be promoted into. We are always working in the probabilities, and sometimes we make mistakes, so we also have to worry about what are the costs of those mistakes. And for senior level positions, for example, the cost is much higher than hiring for blue collar jobs, for example. So we will never be perfect in predicting behavior, but we try to get better and better in kind of incremental stages. If machine learning and technology can help us to do that better and just know a little bit more about a person than we can with the current methods that we use, that is usually, and we can do it with enough reliability and accuracy, then the organization and the person will both benefit. So one of my complaints, though, about the current state of the technology and what we've been able to see is that, as far as I can tell, that the people who are trying to implement these solutions are keeping it pretty close to their vest, and not really, and I can see why. I mean, it's a competitive advantage, and if they can satisfy their customers in their minds, perhaps that's sufficient. A lot of us would like to believe that there's also a professional responsibility to share with the IO community as to what kind of level of success they're having with implementing technologies to predict human behavior. When you think about trying to predict security, the cost of not detecting it is so high that we have, I perceive it as a fairly low threshold of saying to detect somebody and say they are a potential security risk. There's not that much cost in being wrong about that, right? In terms of saying we detect somebody and we believe that they are a security risk and they turn out not to be. There's not much cost in that, but there's a lot of cost if we don't detect it and then we're wrong and they go and do something improper. So we need to worry about that the cost, and we need to worry about the type of error in this case in organizations about where we we don't hire a person who would be successful and go off and perhaps work for a competitor where they are successful, or what they say about their experience. And I haven't seen any research yet. This is a little bit of divergence, but I haven't seen any research yet as to how people feel if and when they know that the decision that's made about them is assisted or largely driven by technology. Do they think that that's more fair and more consistent and therefore not a bad thing for them? Or do they feel, on the other hand, that it doesn't capture, really the essence of their person and what they can contribute to the organization? And they'll go off and say, bad things about that experience, which is not a desirable outcome either. So there are a lot of factors, but your bottom line question, Fabrizio, about how far are we about predicting human behavior? We aren't in the whole typically very good at it. Saying that if we can predict 30 or 40% of how a person's going to behave in the future, we feel real good about that. But that leaves a lot of room for improvement and saying, well, what else can we find that will help us discover what the other 60% that causes people to behave the way they do? If we can use these machine technologies to increment, move that up another even 5%, we'll have great benefits to the organization. But I wish that these companies would share with us that information to help better answer your question about can they really help us make better decisions about people.
So let me close with saying that I'm sure there will be a lot of follow-up on this kind of topics. First of all, let me thank you again for your time and for sharing your thoughts and your vision about artificial emotional intelligence and its impact on our job and especially on our lives and in the future. So thank you a lot, Dave, for your time.
Well, my pleasure. I appreciate having this opportunity, and I hope we can follow up on it sometime.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you a lot.
Thanks.